The lawyer set down a single sealed envelope on the table, looked directly at me, and said the words that would break my family apart in less than 60 seconds. Margaret left everything to a stranger, not to my brother, not to my sister, not to me, to a name none of us had ever heard in our entire lives. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then my sister Diane laughed the way people laugh when they think something is a cruel joke. A nervous, disbelieving sound that cracked halfway through. My brother Richard stood up so fast his chair scraped against the hardwood floor and nearly tipped over. And me, I just sat there, staring at that envelope like it was a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. 3 days earlier, we had buried our mother. 3 days. And now, this cold, sterile office that smelled like old paper and stale coffee. We were about to find out that everything we thought we knew about her, about our family, about ourselves, had been a lie. My name is Claire Whitfield, and for 34 years, I believed I understood my mother. I was wrong. If you're watching this, you already know that inheritance stories rarely end where you expect them to. Stay with me, because what happened in that room, and everything that came after it, will make you question what you really know about the people you love. Before we go further, if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear gets far more painful, and far more redemptive, than you can imagine. Growing up, our house on Maple Ridge Drive looked like something out of a magazine. White shutters, a wraparound porch, a garden my mother tended like it was sacred ground. From the outside, we looked like the family everyone wanted to be. From the inside, it was something else entirely. My father died when I was 9, leaving my mother, Margaret, to raise 3 children alone on a schoolteacher's salary. She never remarried. She never complained, not once, not in front of us. She worked double shifts tutoring after school. She skipped meals so we wouldn't have to. And she still showed up to every piano recital, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference with a smile that never once looked tired. Even when I know now that it must have been. Richard was the oldest, the golden child, the one who got the good grades and the scholarship to state college. Diane was the middle child, beautiful and sharp-tongued, the one who always knew exactly what to say to make you feel 2 inches tall. And I was the youngest, the quiet one, the one who stayed home on weekends to help mom with groceries while my siblings were out living their lives. I never resented that. I loved her. I loved being near her. But somewhere along the way, being the quiet one became being the invisible one. And by the time I was in my 20s, I had learned to expect very little credit for the things I did. I remember one winter when I was maybe 11 years old. The furnace broke, and instead of calling a repairman, we couldn't afford. My mother wrapped the 3 of us in every blanket in the house and told us we were camping indoors, turning a crisis into a game so convincing that it took me 20 years to realize we hadn't had heat for 6 days because there simply wasn't money for the repair. That was who she was. She built a fortress of normalcy around us, brick by brick, out of second-hand furniture and second-hand smiles, and she never once let the cracks show. Looking back now, I wonder how many other things she quietly carried alone so that we would never have to. When mom got sick 2 years ago, it was me who drove her to chemotherapy every Tuesday and Thursday. It was me who slept in the recliner beside her hospital bed more nights than I can count. It was me who held the phone up so Richard could talk to her from 3 states away, because he was always too busy to visit. And it was me who made excuses to Diane's kids about why grandma couldn't come to their birthday parties anymore. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because she was my mother and I loved her. And there is nothing more natural in this world than showing up for the people who raised you. So when the lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Hensley, cleared his throat and told us that the entirety of Margaret Whitfield's estate, the house, the savings, everything, had been left to someone named Thomas Reyes, a man none of us had ever met or heard of, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Diane's voice came out sharp and furious. Who is Thomas Reyes? This has to be a mistake. Check the paperwork again. Richard was pacing now, his hands raked through his hair. She wouldn't do this. She wouldn't cut out her own children for some random man. Someone manipulated her. Someone took advantage of a sick, elderly woman. His voice cracked on the word elderly, like saying it out loud made it more real, more shameful. I didn't say anything at first. I just kept staring at that envelope, my name nowhere on the outside of it, wondering what could possibly be inside that would explain any of this. Mr. Hensley folded his hands on the table and spoke carefully, the way people speak when they know the next sentence is going to detonate something. Your mother was very clear about her wishes. She updated her will 4 months ago, in full possession of her faculties, with 2 independent witnesses and a notarized signature. There's no mistake. He slid the envelope toward the center of the table. She also left this. It's addressed to all 3 of you. She asked that it be read only after the will was disclosed. Diane snatched it before I could reach for it, tore it open with shaking hands, and began to read out loud, her voice rising and cracking with every line. My mother's handwriting, the same looping cursive that used to sign my school permission slips, filled 2 full pages. My dear children, she had written, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you are angry, and you deserve an explanation. Though I know no explanation will feel like enough right now. Diane's hands were trembling so badly that Richard finally took the letter from her and kept reading. 36 years ago, before I met your father, I gave birth to a son. I was 19 years old, unmarried, and my own parents told me that if I kept him, I would no longer be welcome in their home. I had no money, no support, and I believed wrongly that giving him up was the only way to give him a real chance at life. I placed him for adoption through a private agency in Ohio, and I never stopped thinking about him, not for a single day of my life. When I married your father, I told him everything, and he understood. We agreed I would search when the time was right. But life happened, children happened, illness happened, and the years slipped away from me the way years do. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Richard's voice, tight and disbelieving. 2 years ago, when I was first diagnosed, I hired a private investigator, and I found him. His name is Thomas. He is a good man, a mechanic in Ohio with 2 children of his own, and when I finally worked up the courage to call him, I was terrified he would hang up on me, and I would have understood if he had. He didn't hang up. He cried, and so did I, and for the first time in 36 years, I got to say I'm sorry to the son I had spent my whole life mourning in silence. I felt my chest tighten as Richard's voice wavered on the next lines. I know this letter changes everything you believed about our family, and I know it will hurt you to learn that I kept a secret this large for this long. But please understand, leaving him what I left him was never about loving the 3 of you any less. It was about a debt I owed a child I abandoned before I ever had the chance to raise him, a debt 36 years of guilt could never repay. I have already made arrangements, separate from the will, to make sure each of you is taken care of. But the house, the money from your father's life insurance that I never touched, that belongs to Thomas, it is the only inheritance I have to give him, because I already gave the 3 of you something far greater. I gave you a mother who stayed. Nobody spoke for a long time after that. Diane was crying now, angry tears, confused tears. Richard set the letter down like it had burned his hands, and I sat there thinking about every quiet moment I had shared with my mother over the last 2 years. Every Tuesday drive to chemo, every late night in that recliner, and I realized she had been carrying this secret through every single one of them, silently, alone, the way she had carried everything her whole life. I didn't know whether to be furious or heartbroken. I think, honestly, I was both. If a hidden truth this big could exist inside a family this close, imagine what secrets are sitting quietly in your own family history, waiting for their moment. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Legacy Whisper, because the next part of this story is where everything changes. For the following weeks, my siblings did what people in pain often do. They looked for someone to blame. Diane became convinced this Thomas Reyes had somehow coerced our dying mother, manipulated her out of guilt, isolated her, poisoned her mind against her real children. Richard hired a lawyer of his own within days, determined to contest the will, certain that no court in the country would allow a stranger to walk away with the family's entire legacy. They called me constantly, expecting me to join their crusade, expecting me to be as furious as they were. And some nights, I was. But other nights, I lay awake thinking about a 19-year-old girl alone, pregnant, terrified, told by her own parents that love came with conditions. I thought about how she must have felt every single Mother's Day, every birthday, wondering if her firstborn son was safe, was happy, was loved, and never being able to ask. Against my siblings' wishes, I reached out to Thomas myself. I found his number through the lawyer's office, and I sat with my phone in my hand for almost an hour before I finally pressed call. He picked up on the third ring, his voice cautious, guarded, like he had already braced himself for hostility. "This is Claire," I said. "Margaret's daughter." There was a long pause on the line, and then he said quietly, "I wondered if any of you would call." We talked for almost 2 hours that night. He told me about growing up in a loving adoptive family in Columbus, about becoming a mechanic, about the day 2 years ago, when a woman he'd never met called him crying, apologizing for something that happened before he could even form memories. He told me he almost didn't answer, that 36 years of not knowing had built walls he wasn't sure he wanted torn down, but he did answer. And over the following 18 months, while the rest of us were consumed with grief and appointments and hospital visits, our mother had quietly been building a relationship with the son she'd given up, visiting him twice, meeting his children, my nephews and niece I never even knew existed, sitting in his kitchen in Columbus, learning who he had become without her. "She used to talk about you three constantly," Thomas told me, his voice thick with emotion, "about Claire, who never left her side, about Richard's job, about Diane's kids. She wasn't choosing me over you. She told me herself, more than once, that giving me the house wasn't about taking anything from her other children. It was about the one thing she felt she could never give me while I was growing up, which was proof that she never stopped being my mother too." Something shifted in me that night. I stopped seeing Thomas Reyes as a threat and started seeing him as exactly what he was. My brother, someone else who had been quietly wounded by our mother's silence his entire life. Just from the other direction. When I told Richard and Diane about the conversation, it did not go well. Diane accused me of betraying the family. Richard stopped speaking to me for almost 3 weeks. They pushed forward with contesting the will anyway, dragging the case into probate court, dragging our mother's private grief into public record for lawyers and strangers to pick apart. The court battle that followed was ugly in ways I still find difficult to talk about. Richard's attorney argued undue influence. He brought in a forensic accountant to comb through our mother's financial records, looking for any sign of manipulation, any suspicious transfer, any evidence that Thomas had pressured a dying woman. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. What they did find, buried in a storage unit our mother had rented under a maiden name none of us recognized, was worse and more revealing than anything financial. Boxes of letters, addressed to Thomas but never sent, dating back decades. Birthday cards for a son she never met, purchased every single year, and stored away because she didn't know where to send them. A baby blanket, yellowed with age, still folded exactly the way it must have been the day she left the hospital without him. Reading through those boxes in the discovery process broke something open in Richard that even he didn't expect. He called me late one night, his voice raw in a way I had never heard from my composed, controlled older brother. "I found her diary from 1988, he said. She wrote that giving him up felt like cutting off her own arm and being told to smile about it. He was quiet for a long moment. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to prove our mother was manipulated into loving her own son, Claire. What kind of person does that make me?" He told me something else that night too, something he hadn't planned on sharing, but couldn't hold back anymore. When he was 12, he'd found an old photograph of himself as a baby, one he didn't recognize, tucked into a box in the garage. He'd asked our mother about it once, half-jokingly, and she had gone pale and changed the subject so fast that he never brought it up again, assuming it was nothing, some relative's baby picture mixed in by accident. "I think some part of me always knew there was a hole in the story," he admitted quietly. "I just didn't have the courage to go looking for it. And honestly, I resented her a little for making me feel like I had to protect a secret I didn't even know the shape of. That was the turning point. Richard withdrew the legal challenge 2 days later. Diane held out longer, wounded pride mixing with genuine grief, in a way that made her cling to anger because anger was easier to hold than sorrow. But eventually, even she couldn't keep fighting a ghost. What finally broke through wasn't a legal argument or a court ruling. It was an invitation. Thomas, hearing about the storage unit, about the letters and cards our mother had kept in secret for 36 years, reached out to Diane directly. He didn't defend himself or the will. He simply asked if she wanted to see them, if she wanted to understand who their mother had really been. Underneath the woman who packed school lunches and sewed Diane's Halloween costumes, and never once let any of us see her cry, Diane went to that storage unit alone on a Sunday afternoon. She called me 4 hours later from the parking lot, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "There's a card for every single year, Claire. Every year since he was born. 36 birthday cards she never mailed, because she was too afraid he'd hate her for finding him. She wasn't choosing between us. She was drowning in guilt her entire life, and none of us ever noticed. Because she was too busy making sure we never had to feel an ounce of what she was carrying." The lawsuit was dropped completely within the month. But something far more important happened alongside the legal resolution, something none of us expected when this all began. Thomas invited the three of us to Columbus, to the house that was now legally his. Though he made it clear from the very first conversation that he never wanted to keep something that felt like it belonged to a family he had never been part of raising. When Richard, Diane, and I walked into that house together for the first time since the funeral, Thomas was standing in the doorway with his 2 children behind him, looking as nervous as any of us felt. He handed Richard a set of keys before any of us even sat down. "I talked to a lawyer of my own," he said quietly. "I'm splitting the estate for ways. Equal shares. That's what feels right to me. And I think it's what she would have wanted too." Once the anger settled and everyone could actually hear each other, Diane started crying again. The good kind of crying this time, and pulled him into a hug that surprised all of us, including her. "She loved you," Diane told him, her voice breaking. "She loved you enough to carry that secret her whole life, rather than risk losing any of us. That's not betrayal. That's just how broken and beautiful she was." We spent that entire weekend in Columbus going through the boxes together. All 4 of us, reading letters our mother had never had the courage to send. Laughing at old photographs, crying over a woman who had spent her entire life quietly bearing a weight none of us ever knew existed. Thomas told us stories about his adoptive parents, wonderful people who had raised him with love and had passed years earlier, and in a strange, unexpected way, our family didn't shrink that weekend. It grew. We gained a brother, 2 nephews, and a niece we hadn't known a month earlier, and somehow, impossibly, we gained a deeper understanding of the woman who had raised the 3 of us with more strength and more secret sorrow than any of us had ever imagined possible. A few weeks after that weekend in Columbus, I found myself back at the storage unit alone, wanting one more quiet moment with those boxes before Thomas moved them to his own home for good. Near the bottom of the last box, beneath the birthday cards and the folded baby blanket, I found a small notebook I hadn't noticed before. Inside, in my mother's familiar handwriting, was a single unfinished letter dated just weeks before she passed. It wasn't addressed to Thomas this time. It was addressed to the 3 of us. "I don't know if I'll ever find the courage to give you this while I'm alive," it read, "but I need you to know that loving him never once made me love you any less. A mother's heart doesn't divide, it multiplies. Even when the world tells her she isn't allowed to keep every child she carries." I sat on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit and cried harder than I had at the funeral itself. Because for the first time, I understood that her silence had never been about hiding something shameful. It had been about protecting a peace she didn't believe she deserved to disturb. It's been almost a year now since that first meeting in the lawyer's office. The one that shattered everything I thought I knew. Thomas comes to Thanksgiving now. His kids call Diane and Diane like they've known her their whole lives. Richard, who once hired a lawyer to fight him in court, now calls him just to talk about nothing in particular on Sunday afternoons, the same way he used to call our mother and me. I finally understand something I couldn't see clearly while I was drowning in grief and betrayal that day in the lawyer's office. My mother didn't leave everything to a stranger. She spent her whole life trying to make peace with the one person she felt she had failed. And in the end, the truest inheritance she left behind wasn't a house or a bank account at all. It was the chance for the rest of us to become a bigger, more honest family than we ever were before she was gone. Sometimes the truth doesn't feel like a betrayal once you finally understand where it came from. Sometimes the family you're angry at for keeping secrets was only ever trying to protect you from a pain they carried completely alone. My mother spent 36 years grieving in silence so the rest of us could grow up without ever feeling anything less than fully loved. And in her final act, she finally gave herself permission to make it right, even knowing it might cost her the family she had left. It didn't cost her anything in the end. It gave all of us more than any will ever could. If this story moved you the way it moved me to write it, I want to hear from you. Have you ever discovered a secret about someone you loved that changed the way you saw your entire family? Tell me in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your stories matter just as much as this one. And if you believe every family has a hidden chapter worth understanding rather than judging, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Legacy Whisper for more true-to-life stories about family, forgiveness, and the truths that change everything. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.